Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Together is Better podcast. I have a very special guest today, Carsten Hilker, a legend in the SAP world. Carsten, thank you for being on the show today.
Of course, welcome.
All right. We've got a lot to unpack, but I want to start with a couple of questions first. Steak or schnitzel?
Oh, steak, man. Me in America. Big fat steak, yeah.
Okay. Wine or bourbon?
I'm an Irish whiskey guy, but I'll go with bourbon. I don't know.
Okay. Rolling Stones Exile on Main Street or the Allman Brothers Fillmore?
Rolling Stones.
Okay. That's the second one that we've gotten for the Stones, so that's pretty solid.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's jump right into it. Tell us a little bit about your background for the audience. Share your history with us.
Yeah. So born in Stuttgart, Germany, where actually 60 miles away, SAP is headquartered. Never worked for them for the longest time. So born close by, became actually a project manager for a bank, implemented SAP, and then became a consultant with Cobras Leibbrand in Germany, and then came over in 1995 to the US, so more time in the US than in Germany actually. Worked for Deloitte and Computer Science Corporation and a management accounting boutique firm, consulting firm, so always like in the ERP space, the finance, the controlling management accounting space. And then in 2007, my wife told me to settle down, so we settled down in Boston. I joined SAP directly and worked for them for 15 plus years in solution management. And so my role was really evangelism of the finance and the controlling performance management capabilities towards our field, towards partners, towards customers, towards Gartner in the briefings. And then some 8-9 years ago, we created a new solution actually called SAP Central Finance, which is like a central deployment of a new S4 system with like a finance first approach. So a kind of a step into S4 in a phased rollout approach. We started it and we ran it very successfully. And 2 years ago, I retired from full-time employment from SAP. So I did a big step, and now I kind of do a lot of things that I like to do now. Give back mainly, work with cool people on cool, interesting things.
Yeah.
That brings us together now.
Well, you did a lot of very cool things when you were working at SAP, and you're continuing to do that today with clients. You meet with a lot of CFOs. What are you hearing from CFOs today?
Really interesting, right? Where they come from, where they are. So the ones that are more global, they have a better take on, what the local economies, how they're going. They're much more hesitant in that sense because Europe has a tough time. Asia has a tough time. US depends on what you talk about. If you talk about high tech, right? Or everything around chip or manufacturing in that sense, they still have a lot of money. On the consulting side, they're kind of all waiting, is this economy going to slow down a little bit or not? So they're a little in a pause mode. But independent of that, you don't know. No one has known for 2 years. No one knows for another 2 years. You have to move forward, right? And because the technical debt just keeps piling up and these new innovations become available, so you've got to do something in the meantime. And I think very hesitantly monitoring, still investing, really cautious about their investment, but they know they have to keep spending.
Do the CFOs that you speak with feel like they have the real-time data and information that they need to make decisions on behalf of the business? And where are they looking to make additional investments today? Yeah. You talked about Central Finance. Maybe you can unpack that a little bit.
Yeah. So I want to say that most of these companies actually would say, or CEOs would say, I don't have really the best possible data, right? And then is it real time or not? Is it there or not? Probably not really. They have what they need to run their business. Is the way their organization has to go about getting them the information, the effort, the effectiveness, is that the highest possible? Absolutely not. I think what is the reality is that 80+% of these large corporations, they have more than one ERP system. So it's not about just saying, okay, I have an old car and I buy a new car and I'm done, right? They have a garage full of cars. We have customers with up to 100, 150, 200 ERP systems, right? Most of them, large enterprises have between 8 and 10 and 12, and SAP, non-SAP. So if you wanted them to really get to, you have real-time everything you wanted, it's a journey, right? And the journey's cost and it's gradual improvement. But I think they all know they can do better, far better. And it's, I think, for them really about finding the best way to get the most for their money that they invest. So they make these improvements, sometimes smaller, sometimes phased, some certain big step ones. They know how to do it because the technical debt just keeps piling up and it's expensive to maintain this old stuff and not get out of it what you need.
Yeah, there was a movement for the last decade, for the big bang transformations. How has that changed from the CFO's perspective? Do they want to make more of an incremental investment?
Yeah.
Are they trying to de-risk this, Give us some of the feedback that you're hearing from them.
So for me, interesting enough, when we started Central Finance, which is like a central deployment of S4, you put it out, you keep everything else running, just connected, and now you have the benefit of one single source that's real time, that's harmonized, that's standardized. You can run central process on it. So you basically have the best the finance guy wants. Everything is in one system, and I can run processes on top of it, right? So that's really cool and good. In order to get there, you have to start these projects. And if you look at the life cycle of these new innovations, you have the very early adopters, right? And the organizations, the culture, the revenue, the profit they're making determines, I can go. And they did it. So the 5 to 10%, they're done basically. And now you get into the midstream adoption line, and now the target profile changes. And I think that's what I'm seeing, right? We're still doing a lot of greenfield, but that costs a lot of money. But we're seeing more and more brownfield, because now you're getting more into customers for them. They're not the leaders, right? They may be the mainstream or the laggards. They'd rather not invest, or they don't have that much money. So now they turn from making big strides that cost me a lot, and with a big bang, towards what are more composable ways of getting there, phased approaches. And brownfield is much more in discussion in my mind, right? So then I can basically maintain my maintenance and compliance and support in there. I make some progress, but it doesn't cost me an arm and a leg. And then I just improve incrementally in certain areas that I need. Especially in finance, there's lots of different areas, procurement side, supply chain, the same thing.
Right.
Because now we're not dealing with a monolith anymore. We're dealing with a lot of capabilities that you can plug in, like Ariba procurement is not the same there anymore. Right. And so I think the customers, the CFOs, the organizations are becoming more creative into what actually helps me out next.
Yeah. So when they're evaluating a transformation, let's say the CIO takes that information and they package that up and they bring it to the CFO for approval. What are the financial metrics that the CFO is looking at? What's more important? Is it the payback on it? Is it the long-term visibility and de-risking of the environment that they're going to get, consolidation of different infrastructure? What are they really targeting and looking at?
Yeah. So if it comes to investment within finance, right, that's really interesting. There's obviously always the governance aspect, right? It's like eventually they can just say, I need a system that reports the right numbers to me every quarter, right, period. And then they can, in theory, invest what they want to, because this has to be part of the business. And the other areas are more like improvements that give you a payback. So in that sense, the payback has to be justified. And a part of it is governance in that sense. Part of it is you need to just replace old stuff and basically accommodate maybe underlying KPIs like cloud. Do I want to have these resources? Do I want to pay for it? Is it capital expense versus operating expense? So a lot of this is more or less about the shift of the resources and putting it together so that it still fits. I think overall it just has to fit into the purse of that organization, right? So if you maybe have an IT budget of $1 billion, you will not be able to justify a $2 billion expense in that sense, right? So I think it's really the creativity and these different kind of KPIs that you have, or these outcomes that you have, and depending on the CFO and the business also, right? They just go different ways. Organizations that are much more under cost pressure right now or have very little profit, they can do less, whereas other organizations that do well do more strategic things. So it comes much more down to tactical if you're like tight with money, and more strategic if you have more money in mind.
So if you're one of those customers that things are tighter, right, economically for them, what's the best starting point that has the highest return, or what's the best foundation piece that they should be employing to get started?
Yeah. So for me, the interesting part here is that we, after 20 years of saying, hey, let's bring everything together into one ERP, right? That's how we started. We had best of breed solutions. And then we said, well, if they all do the same, if this is commodity capabilities, let's bring it together in one. So now we're kind of at the tail end of it. And who knows if this is just marketing or life cycle the way it is. But I feel right now we're going not necessarily back to best of breed, but to versus one big solution, 2 point solutions that can work with each other very well. That's a requirement now, but that give me in that space what I need, right? And I think that's what the tactical solutions are. In finance, for example, you could do Blackline for accelerated financial close, or on treasury side, right? You figure out how to better, faster, more digitally interact with your customers. And I think that's really what it comes down to, that it's much more point solutions. And they don't have to be served by the big partners anymore, right? So you kind of come from one big project by one big five, and now maybe it's much more about smaller pieces that actually a whole lot of organizations can do very well. And maybe it's not the big partners anymore.
Yeah, we talked with Greg Beyer from JDC, and that was kind of one of the opinions that he had, which is, look, there's a shift towards specialization. And especially as you started looking at these different business processes, what it really takes to unlock that value. It sounds like those are good starting points, but they really require a whole different set of skills. What's your thought on just the evolution, if you want to call it, of the system integrators and the rise that you're starting to see of all these boutique firms?
Yeah, super interesting for me, because during the phase of getting into the big central ERPs, you would have one consulting firm that would help you, right? And it was the big 6, big 5, big 4, whoever they are. And they can basically do everything. They help you with the data, with the processes, these kind of things. And that was required. And now it's really about smaller projects, much more specialty knowledge, as you said, required, and about good resources. When they also had the best resources and they had the best training to get the resources. Now that these organizations are kind of evolving themselves, right? There's a lot of people that work that they don't want to work for this kind of business environment anymore. So these smaller partners that are focused on something specialized, they have really cool resources, often better than these people, than in the big consulting firms. And to bring people up that are good, it's not necessarily that you have to just put an 18-year-old on a project. You actually assemble a team of good people. And those organizations, not everyone is, some are just staff organizations. Those that assemble a team of good sound people can outbeat the others, because what they're competing on is not the entire picture anymore, but that subject matter area. Really good. And then you can win.
Yeah, and I think you get quicker wins, because like you talked about, instead of trying to do everything in a big bang anymore, it's let's go do what's achievable. Let's find success. Let's drive value immediately, and then use that as a building block. And it may be just in a certain process, like for what we do with procurement, same thing. A lot of times when procurement organizations are looking at their transformation, it's preceding S4, for example, and they're doing that to basically help self-fund part of the investment that the CFO is looking for to go unlock an S4 transformation project. So that's pretty interesting. So you talked a little bit about agility as well and being very flexible. Give me kind of the profile of what somebody should look for if they're going to go evaluate a boutique. High depth of experience, or you think they're more localized? Is it more global? What do you think?
So for me, there's a couple of aspects that are really important. The first one is when you deal with the larger organizations, they come to you, propose their work, they present you with company accolades, right? We as an organization have done these kind of customers. Well, these people that have done this kind of work, they're not going to be on your project. To what degree is that actually really relevant? Right?
Correct.
Versus a local firm assembles a team of people that have actually have done this kind of work here and here and here. So it's really company accolades versus team quality of the individuals that make up the team. And that's what you need to look at in a boutique, right? The people that will work for me, and often in proposals, because smaller firms have that capability, the people that work with you on a proposal are the people that will be on the project, right? So you get to know these. Boutique firms also are much more local rather than the global firms, right? Of course, you have to do nearshoring and offshoring, but at the end, it's like the difference is for you as a customer, if something doesn't go well, you have to, in a big firm, you have to find out where the partner is in Bangalore and his name, and one at a time, so to yell at him. Versus the boutique companies, well, it's Greg around the corner. He's here. You call him in.
Right.
I think that responsibility part is really, really important, because you can hold those small firms accountable. And I think that's really important because in the past, project was a single ERP project. And since the last 2 years, we did some studies when I was still at SAP, we figured out that most implementations right now, transformations, migrations, are multi-product deployments. So it's not unusual that you have several projects running at the same time.
Right.
Program office bring this together. So to hold these individual people responsible, especially where they have to work with each other, I think is a real cool thing. And the third part for me is really agility of local organizations, of partner organizations, right? If you deal with the big organizations, you say, all right, I take 100 people for the next 18 months and that's it. There is no accommodation towards the reality of projects. When you get to the testing, you need far more.
Right.
Shortly before that, when it comes down to sign-off for 2 or 3 weeks, maybe you don't need them anymore. So smaller organizations are much more agile in regards to ramping up and ramping down. And I think the second thing that I see right now is that there is, whenever you do some work, there is some super experts that have done this, advisors, executive advisors, because they're smaller organizations. They can bring partial experts to you. You don't have to pay for them the entire project, right? But they're available to you half day, full day, and you can still afford them without having to pay for them all the time.
Yeah,
that resource mix is really interesting for me.
Yeah, I like that, because what we started to see too is that if you think of the continuity on a project, there's sometimes these periods and gaps, right, where the business just needs to stabilize itself, or maybe there's another competing or adjacent project.
Yeah.
And then paying for that resource for that full time, they're not getting all the value.
Yeah.
And there's different pockets of opportunity where you can really focus and drive, I think, better collaboration in that other model that you're describing, which kind of leads me to the next question that I have for you. You know, I look back at this industry, and over the last 20 or 30 years, it really hasn't fundamentally changed much, right? It's really kind of been that offshore, onshore model, the army of people that are there. We talked just a little bit about the specialization. With the innovations that are coming out today, where do you see the consulting industry, system integrators in particular, 5 years from now?
Super interesting. I think obviously the automation part, the RPA part, or the workflow part, which is pre-AI, I think we will see that more and more in embedded into consulting offerings. It will be embedded into what they do. Like you automatically have the system generate itself for the next iteration that you want to do. And now with Gen I, it's also processing documents and information and give you maybe a recommendation towards how you should set up a process or how you should improve it. And we've seen the first steps by larger consulting companies already having some offerings out there. I think it's going to change dramatically.
Yeah.
What needs to be done is still the same, but how fast it will be done and how much its support it gets from technology will dramatically change and hopefully improve how quickly you can implement and how well you can implement, in my mind.
Yeah, you look at a time frame that has been standard for over a decade for deployment.
Yeah.
Now imagine a world where that is, half the time or even less.
Yeah.
Right? And even half the cost. And I think the model itself begins to evolve because you're now looking at, okay, I need deep expertise on advising me about where the constraints are, where some of the issues may lie. I like also some of these other tools that are allowing better visibility into these process constraints, things like SAP Signavio, for example, absolutely. Right? Which is doing, deep process mining and then allowing you to focus on the execution management component of that. Yeah. Do you see a combination of those tools being brought into how companies are going to advise on how they actually need to deploy?
Absolutely. And for me, there's two differentiations. There's a differentiation between two things. We talked about it last night, actually. One is on the implementation side, the migration to S4 or on implementing a new company, bringing it on and so on. And from that, you have the business blueprinting activity. Let's say it's 3 months. Yep. And that's really an activity where a lot of people get together, review a lot of documents, lots of interviews, interactions to determine, okay, this is how we should be doing it. You can basically turn this thing around today. I'm supporting a little startup here where you basically do it data-driven. You just suck the information in, the actual postings, the configuration. You go to external websites like the Danish tech site, and then the system comes back in minutes for you without cost, without overtime, without overnight, and tell you, well, this is how you probably could do it. And then you can have a discussion around that. So I think the implementation, the blueprinting especially, because I'm working on that, could be reduced to a day. Done. Then you have the discussions, right? For the ongoing process improvement, I think as well the same thing, right? Signavio is the starting point for making it much more transparent what's actually happening. And obviously, Gen AI can do something with it. You still need smart people to kind of interpret this and invoke the changes though. Yeah. But the same thing here, because then you can have run these things as little sensors, as little health checks, right? It's like a pulse thing and tells you something's wrong, now you can do something. And I think that's often what is missing in these organizations, right? They do a process and the COE is all up to date, and then a year later something goes wrong eventually to a degree where it's really bad. Then you do something. Yeah. And by automating this and making digitally processed, as soon as something goes wrong, you get an alert. After 2 alerts, the system maybe self-fixes it with the guidance of some people. So maybe.
Yeah, it's crazy because you look at, and I'm not wearing one, but if you look at, the Fitbits or the watches or whatever, and they're giving you all of this diagnosis and great information about your body, I see that type of sensor approach within the infrastructure and within the process flows, right? So that if you have an issue, it can be resolved quickly. And with some right resources, kind of prescribing what needs to happen. I think all of that in the next 5 years is going to become a reality for these large enterprises.
I think so. Yeah. And that's the last thing for me is that's really important. We hear a lot of transformations failed, but in my mind, it is not that the transformation failed, but what we've seen over the last 10, 15 years especially is basically management consulting, there was a demise of it. And instead of looking at all domains, organization and process and technology or product, we only looked at product. And the last 5 or 10 years, even right now, these are product dumps. The answer is which transaction SAP,
Correct.
right? There's no thinking about anymore. What's the overall process and what's the continuous improvement and what do I need to change around? And organization, well, who should be doing this within the organization? So I see some strong trends where actually these transformations, they didn't fail, they weren't completed. And now management consulting skills and organizations that do this, and many of the small can do it, come back and say, well, okay, so now let's look at this. We have this product, you deployed it this. How do we actually make it and do it what you want it to do? Right? And so now we can come back even in this area. Someone needs to look at, okay, if there's a health check and tells you, well, this process is not going well, you need to solve this not only in the meaning of transaction, well, which transaction should we use instead, but who in the organization should be doing it, right? And what is the process before and after, and who monitors that? So I think it's a resurgence of people that are small, that have actually grown up in the 90s and 2000s, and actually the small boutique companies have a lot of those. And that's, for me, actually also a key difference between these bigger companies and the smaller companies. The bigger companies, right, they bring young people in and eventually churn them out. And now a lot of those people that have done this kind of work for a long time, they're now for boutique companies, right? So they can very easily transfer to, okay, the answer is not only that transaction code. Who's going to do it and why and when and these kind of things. So really cool.
Yeah. So speaking of that, because it's a Gen X conversation, 1980s hair bands or 1990s rap and hip hop?
I'm a rap and hip hop guy.
All right.
You wouldn't think it, but I am.
That's awesome.
Perfect.
So going back to kind of the view that you're laying out there, how are organizations going to have to rethink and reimagine based on the technology and what's becoming at the digital core, right? Yeah. Because I look at in our field procurement, for example, and the functions that are built today. They don't really have to look and shouldn't look like they should. I think there's going to be a combination of things. There's going to be restructuring and reorganization because the process is going to be different. What's required to actually mine that information and interpret it, like you just said.
Yeah.
I think it's also going to require different skill sets. So I can imagine even in the procurement space, these agile pools of teams that include things like data scientists. Mm-hmm. Like, hey, we have to create, some different mapping or a different machine language approach towards this because I need this interpretation.
Yeah.
What do you think about that? Is it going to evolve just kind of flowing down because you have a bunch of heritage organizations that just want to throw technology on top of it? They don't support each other.
No, absolutely. And I think it's a pendulum that swings, and especially the last 3 to 5 years, it's just technology done. Implement S4. Why? Don't worry. Implement S4.
Right.
And the answer is then the transaction within. But now you have to do, okay, now that I have this technology, what can it do for me? What should it be doing for me? How should it be doing these kind of things? And again, so your example was good in the process of something. So the Ariba does, okay, I can buy something. Well, who analyzes what should be bought? Who analyzes why things are bought? Who analyzes the kind of people that always overpay? Who are these people and why are they doing this? Organizations that go really cheap and don't say, why are they doing this? So there's a lot about bringing this back now out. The pendulum swings in one direction, technology focus only, dump it in. And now back to making it actually really use and work for you. So now we optimize the usage of technology. We think about how technology should help me achieve what I want to achieve and bring it back up. Absolutely.
So you have within S4, you have public and private cloud.
Yeah.
Walk us through a little bit of the differences between the two, and then what types of customers typically choose one or the other.
Yeah. Really interesting, because even like the way you phrased this, give me the difference and then we'll break it down. I think maybe we should approach it differently to begin.
Sure.
Who are you?
Yeah.
Right? And if you're a mid-sized company or a small company, then you do not need the complexity of an international organization. If you're more like a service-oriented, then you don't have the complexity of manufacturing in there, right? You also don't have the requirements of localization all over the place. And because you don't deal with that long about business, because maybe you're just a new company, there's not that many enhancements that you needed to accommodate your processes. Then public cloud is the answer, right? Very easy. Now, if all the other things apply and you are currently using a non-public cloud system, you are using an Oracle on-premise, on SAP on-premise, R3 or S4 even, then obviously you have to see, is that thing good enough for me or not?
Right.
And for most right now, it's maybe not on that highest level, But then again, a lot of this really depends on, at the end, it's just a bunch of transactions you execute. Right? If it really doesn't exactly work that way, are you going to die?
Right.
And that's where it comes back to company culture, which is the largest differentiator for me at the very end, right? It's like, are you an organization where the CEO just says, we're going to do it this way, and I'll give you $1,000 per month if you do it, right?
Yep.
And everyone will be happy. You get it done in 6 months. If you're a large organization where everyone has an opinion, or like you have a footprint like an Exxon, right? I mean, it's
huge.
impossible, right? Everyone wants what they've always had. So I think public cloud has caught up a lot. It's still a different target market, but they're obviously getting closer in capabilities every year. Public cloud gets more. But for a while, we will see the private cloud prevalent in the large enterprises, no question.
Yeah. Do you feel like the pace of innovation is beginning to outstrip the decision-making capability within companies? Like, we've got a lot of great innovations that are out there. You have BTP, you have Gen AI. It feels like to me like a lot of companies are trying to figure out what they need to do and how far they need to take it. Let's take AI for an example. How much of that is actually real and how much of that is hype at this point?
Yeah. So for me, it's actually really interesting because I worked for a product company, but I wasn't in a sales role and I was kind of in an evangelist role. So even there, I had to sometimes fight with different silos within SAP. And now that I'm more like on an advisor role and talk to customers as a coach in that sense, my perspective, I'm allowed now to think differently. Right? Let's say it this way. It is really a lot of these technology innovations were released, no question. But all we're doing right now is talking hype. And if you really look at it, who drives it? It drives the technology vendors, right? And it does Gartner drives it. So is it really driven by companies that said, I had this cool thing and now I can do this better?
Yep.
These are not innovations for the origin of the business. This manufacturing is better or this service delivery is better. It's like back office system or enabling system. So as long as we recognize as companies, I see this with CFOs, that the hype is coming exclusively from product vendors because they want that conversation to take place. And you take a step back and say, is it actually real? Mm-hmm. How real is it tomorrow? Then you can make good decisions.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, because it's such a hyped world in that sense, and Gartner has, I think, this hype cycle that's really helpful. It's not easy to say what you're going to do. You could be the Apple and say, I wait 10 years till it falls out and I come up with one clever idea and do it better.
Yeah.
Or you like the NVIDIA that actually does it, right? So there's no right or wrong. But a lot of this is about hype. And again, because I think the discussion was focused by, was driven by product vendors, technology. And that's, again, if you have to bring it back into the context of in your organization for the process that you needed, what does it do?
Yeah.
And then will we de-hype it? But right now, there is so much stuff coming on.
Yeah.
It is
There's a ton. Well, I look at it as there's so much unstructured data, right, that nobody can mine. I saw one recent survey that I think was 20% is actually usable.
Yeah.
So imagine, pouring through the other 80% and putting that through large language models and things like that. Yeah. There's a tremendous amount of power, but there's a lot of hard work that has to go in to get the business in position to do that. And that's where you need the digital core, right? And you have some level of consolidation in these businesses to really unlock the potential of that, I think.
Yeah.
What about any adjacent technologies that are touching the SAP ecosystem that you find interesting? Is there anything cool out there that you think has got the potential to add a lot of value across that horizontal platform?
I think there is obviously a lot of smaller solution, what SAP called solution extensions, right? Again, you focus on the first 80% and then maybe you don't look at what these do, right? Open text like invoice processing or Blackline, the financial close are examples where now customers actually look at more to complete their transformation, right? And those are established vendors and those are processes that you have to focus on one thing first, right? And that's get the big thing in, right?
Yep.
So I think there's lots of point solutions that are good. I think there's lots of, we talked about this yesterday too, you can deploy these existing solutions that we know in maybe different ways or alter the way you use them. I think we'll see a lot of that there. And that sometimes comes with technology enhancement, but maybe just a different perspective on how to use things, right? We talked about, for example, could I use Ariba for central purchasing and maybe for intercompany?
Right.
Well, hell, you can, right? If you know what it does, and then it can help you a lot there as well. Besides that, I think there's enough technology right now out there and enough things that move around crazy. I think it's maybe more about going back to organization and process.
Correct.
What do I actually want to do,
Yeah.
and how should technology help me? And then you make actually more structured sense out of it, and then you actually figure out what of the data do I actually need, right? And maybe the 20% that you said is only useful is maybe all of that is all I need. Maybe I don't need the other 80%. So
Yeah, I think there's more optionality right today.
yeah.
For the decision makers, and I think you nailed a very important point, which is companies have to step back. Who are we really?
Yeah.
What is our core business? All right, what are the ancillary businesses that we may have as well? And what do we want to be, or what do we see the business in 5 years? Because sometimes they make decisions that I think, look, they could step in just a little bit, and then determine if the next step is the right one, or if they need to go right and left, or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
So I'm glad that you mentioned that, because I think there's a lot of great technologies out there that help bridge the gap.
Yeah.
Where it doesn't all have to be in this giant big movement of transformation.
And I think, interesting enough, what I see in conversations with CFOs is not only do the companies have to say, and let me take a step back. Okay, this technology is great. What does my organization and process, how does this even fit in? But the parties that they talk to need to adjust like that.
Correct.
And that's the other thing that's really interesting. So take a Deloitte, super company, love them, right? Well, they have an order practice and SAP. They do all different kinds of practice. Now, if you talk to the Deloitte SAP practice, they're not going to give you a non-SAP. Well, if you have SAP and non-SAP in your system, you have to make sure you get the Deloitte person from SAP inside. If you go away from these dedicated silo practice that build out because they specialize to more smaller firms, they can cover you much more comprehensively.
Yeah.
And they can also be with you much more in a real this decision building process, in my mind. So, for example, companies, they do a lot of over analysis right now. They say, okay, should I use group reporting or one stream? And I'm like, I don't know, this is a BMW versus a Mercedes, right? They both drive, it's your preference at the end. But companies need to acknowledge that they know they don't need to overanalyze this kind of thing. If someone has a score of 83 and the other has 82, flip a coin. Right? I mean, that's really what it comes down to. Yet, this is still not
Make the
good enough for
decision, move on.
What's really relevant to you? And then with certain companies and products, technology products, it's a commodity, right? They're not new things. They're established things. They're reliable. Make them use. It works one way or another. But move on and do it. And I think that's the other thing. This decision paralysis that I see, especially with more and more technology coming out. It's like, okay, which one is a commodity? Let's do that. Everything else is wishful thinking. Do I need this? Is it a risk? I think the decision-making, the thinking about a decision has to be a little bit different. And I think if you have the right partner on the other side, that can make a lot of difference because it's not the company's business to have these kind of decisions. Right? The CFO has to worry about all different kinds of things, interest rates and financing, and he couldn't be bothered. Is it Oracle and SAP, or is it? Doesn't care, right?
Right. What's the business outcome?
That's right.
Right.
That's right.
The underlying technology is not as important,
I think.
All right. Now, there's an argument on the other side of that as well.
Yeah.
But in terms of that decision-making process, you have the CFO, obviously. How wide is that decision going now? Because it used to be where I would see a CIO and a CFO in particular kind of leading that charge. Now I see head of sales, I see supply chain, I see more of a committee-based approach. How valuable is that to draw in everybody's perspectives and then figure out the prioritization of what to roll out? To me, it always started with central finance, but in some cases now, especially with this volatile world, there's a lot more emphasis on supply chain.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. So I think it comes back to, I remember this when I worked for Computer Science Corporation, they had this really cool service offering. And that kind of side is IT tells the world, CFO and everyone else what you can do. And this world has to tell IT what the art of the possible is.
Yeah.
And so from that perspective, it all has to be out committees because you have to hear from the business what they need to do their stuff better. But you also have to tell the business, did you know this kind of shit is possible today, right?
Yeah.
And so in the committee, I think in that sense, when it goes larger now, sales and marketing, that's the right decision because IT, again, is enabling technology for your business. And on the marketing side, you can do a lot. On the production, on the procurement side, you can do a lot. And so basically for me, the CIO and the CFO is kind of the next step. And they come back. Can we afford it? How much money do we have? The CIO can tell you, what is my investment plan for the next 3 years? If you do this, this has to go. And then they can look at it and balance this. Has to be like this way.
Yeah.
And as you said, I mean, it's like dependent with swings. Sometimes it's finance more, sometimes supply chain. And now Gen I is kind of actually the business model that those organizations engage in. But it has to be a continuous dialogue, and the CFO is really, really important, I think more important than in the past, because they kind of steer the organization financially through all of this transition and transformation, right? You have to invest, you have to maintain and support, you still have to upgrade yourself, but not it's not have money in the bank.
Yeah, exactly. Right? And what you don't want is to have that project go 2 years beyond and, $50 million, $100 million over budget.
That's right. And so I think that the partnership, because a lot of what you need to make all of these business needs happen is more and more technology, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, you need your plans and you need your equipment and all of stuff, but it's more and more technology even there. The CFO is a real partner in that sense to making it happen. So when you look at now back to deployment models of S4, right? You can do a big bang, takes you 2 years, you don't get anything, you get a final bill, and then 2 years from now you get something.
Right.
Well, that's one approach, right? Or you do brownfield, say I pay less and don't get that much out of it, right? Maybe that's what more companies do now these days. Or you do a phased approach where you say, I have it milestone based and I get 500,000 of value every quarter, and that's all I pay, and then I just deliver out. And by the way, it's more digestible, right? My organization can do this because I only need teams of 20, 30 people instead of 200, 300 people. So now I think the CFO and the CIO are a lot of hooked about, regarding the value delivery. Is it actually happening or not? And if it doesn't happen, obviously the business they don't get it. So they're disappointed. The IT people look like, what am I supposed to do? It's a big project. Yeah. And the CFO has to find additional money to fund it. Yeah. So I think we see a lot of discussion around the deployment approaches independent of brownfield, greenfield, central finance. Just say, what kind of organization am I? Greenfield, dramatic change 2 years down the road. Brownfield, I don't care and will improve over time. Or maybe I'll go towards this new world, but in digestible areas. It's really interesting for me.
Yeah. Do you feel like, kind of going back to that whole concept of what do things look like in 5 years? What's the CFO's role look like in 5 years? Is there going to be any additional evolution? I mean, obviously their core capabilities and responsibilities, but anything else, do you feel like that would affect what they're doing today and shape the CFO role in the future?
Yeah. So I think two things, and the first one I might get in trouble for, but it's like everyone else always comes in, SAP or Gartner, they always tell their CFOs how their role is going to change and what they should be doing. Like, you have to be a better business partner, all of these kind of things. And I'm like, we should ask a CFO for once, actually, what they should be doing if this is actually reality. Yeah. So this is a good question. I think in my mind, there's the core of their business. They have to run the finance operations, period, right? And they have to do this better and faster and cheaper and at higher quality. And there's an all-increasing pressure. And their own business of running finance, I think, will benefit from all of these capabilities you mentioned, right? RPA and automation and workflow and AI and experts and data scientists and stuff like this. But they also have to keep the organization going by financing and making sure that the business gets through IT and other technology investments what they're going to get. So I think they're going to have their arms full, and they're much more an advisor in that sense of driving and steering the business together with the CEO in that sense. And so from that perspective, I see how they are moving up in many, many areas, right? Because there has to be a dialogue, there has to be a dialogue between CFO, CIO, and the businesses. There has to be a dialogue between the CFO and the CEO, because the direction, the strategy is set here has to be achievable, right? Yes. And so I think that's going to change. That relationship is going to be stronger and stronger and stronger. And you see that with how many CFOs right now becoming CEOs. Yeah, well, that was not always the case, right?
No, it wasn't. And I'm glad you brought that up, because I looked at that as a very significant trend. I think the role of the CFO has so much input into so many different areas and so much visibility about what's working and what's not and what are the right bets to make. That evolution for the CFO into the CEO role is natural to me. Yeah. Right? Yeah. And so I'm excited to see that trend. I think it continues too.
Yeah.
For sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Where do you see SAP in 5 years?
Oh, interesting.
You're going to be right at the end of the maintenance. Right. Deadline of 2027. They're continuing to innovate. The business is starting to change. What happens?
So really interesting, because I was closer at it and I was involved in many things. I'm like, how does this all going to work out, right? HANA and then S4 and now the cloud and all of this stuff. There was no concern or doubt. It's like, but you see 100,000 pieces are up in the air, right? I'm like, oh dear God, right? But no one else does it better anyways, but it doesn't matter at this point. So I think now after these 5, 6, 7 years in, Christian Klein has done an amazing job actually, right? Was I one of his fiercest critics at the beginning? Yeah, obviously I'm German, right? We like to criticize. But bottom line is, right, they just keep going. They just keep going. Right. And I think what they have going for themselves is that they're better than the others. They're better than Oracle and these others, right? But there's still a huge veil, a big ship in there, but they're going in the right direction. They're dragging their customers and their partners with them.
Yeah.
And from that perspective, I think I'm really positive about SAP 5 years from now, because that's just the case. It's not a commodity that's exchangeable, right? If you have invested in SAP or Oracle, whatever infrastructure, you're not just going to replace it from today to tomorrow, right? And as long as that vendor, that provider of the technology platform keeps growing, you will grow with them. So very positive about it.
Yeah, I think it took a lot of courage, for some of the decisions that he's had to make. And, they weren't easy, but I think his vision is correct. I think he sees very clearly, and I think the board also believes in his vision. They just re-upped his contract for another 5 years. So I think, the business has always needed to evolve. The pace of innovation and evolution in any big company can always be scary, not just to employees, but to customers. But I think, with him at the helm, I think they're gonna arrive at the destination well, and I think customers are gonna be really happy with the outcome.
And I think that's what it for me at the beginning. Every new leader has to establish his track record, right? And he's done it for 7 years, and there's truly amazing things that come out. There's so much that customers still have to implement yet. So even if they would stop development now, customers will be busy on new things for the next 5-7 years. Yeah.
Where's Carsten in 5 years?
Oh my
you at the beach?
No.
Where are you going to be?
I met a couple of ex-colleagues the other day for dinner and lunch, and they said you're always passionate, you're always active. So I will continue to be passionate. I will continue to engage with people I love, right? With you and Greg and JDC and others, and on things that I like, and I hopefully can give back a lot to the community, to my ex-customers. I still contact many of them. They talk to me. I love helping out and giving back. So hopefully 5 years from now, we're here.
Well, I'll tell you what, the customer community really gets a tremendous amount of value from your transparency, your honesty, all your experience. It's refreshing in this world, right? In a lot of ways.
It's very different.
Right. Yes. And I think they need it, right, to be successful. And so, again, thank you so much for this great conversation that we've had today. It's been fantastic. Hopefully our clients and the rest of the partner community out there learned something from this. But thank you very much. I'm really grateful.
You're very welcome. It was a pleasure. I live and strive for those conversations.
Awesome. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks for tuning in. Follow us on LinkedIn. Please click on the link below, and we'll see you next time.